Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Victoria, I'm part of Rethinking Economics, and we're really happy to be co-hosting this event with the Free Word. So our first speaker is not physically with us here today, but she is Yuan Yang. Yuan is one of the co-founders of the Rethinking Economics network that I'm part of, and she's also an active poet. And she's written a poem for us this evening, which is sort of her response to this question of what growth means. So we're all just going to hear that to start the evening off.
When you're 50, go wherever you like. The Chinese will be as rich as the Americans, and I'll be on my pension or dead, he said. I thanked him for the advice and left his office. I thought of how my children, maybe your children, would be born without that striving sense that life is better elsewhere in the West. I only want to go where you can grow too. All I want is a city you'd be old with me in. All I need is a bed. Imagine what humans would have done if the shade didn't draw us back daily. Imagine what lack of love would be left. When I'm 50, I'll have loved you for half of my life. My baby cousins will be getting married, and their mothers won't worry about the in-laws' salaries. We'll all be as rich as the Americans, and that's the end of that, I hope. We'll be as full as a monk who puts his mouth to the stream that flows ceaselessly. Will be as complete as his closing his lips, licking the droplets, and taking his leave. May I grow to slake every thirst I possess, except for you. May life come as easily to our children as water to the lips. May they know when to dip their heads and when to lift.
So, to the panel that is here with us today, we're really excited about just the range of speakers that we have here. We're going to start with Kate Rayworth, who is Senior Visiting Research Associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute.
Okay, so Victoria asked everybody, how do you think about growth? And I'm just going to jump in and talk about how economists think about growth typically. Well, you know how economists think about growth. They think about economic growth, GDP growth. Over time, it's grown exponentially. It's a very particular kind of growth. So over hundreds of years, first you see almost nothing happening, and then suddenly it took off, particularly around 1950 on the global scale. In fact, an economy that's growing 3% a year would double in size every 23 years. That's just how exponentials work. Stuart has agreed not only to lend me a hand, he's going to lend me his arm for the evening. So could you just give me an exponential growth curve? No, that way. There we are. Right. That is beautiful sample of exponential growth, right? It just goes up and up and up and up. That shape actually is deeply comforting to us because the shape of growth lies in our language. It's in our metaphors. Anyone who's raised a child knows that the most exciting thing that happens is they start to crawl and then they pull themselves up. So this sense of forward and up is deeply rooted in our sense of progress as humanity. So no wonder this picture of growth looks so natural to us. So let's have that lovely exponential curve again. There we are. And with a small flip of the arm, this is what's called logistic growth. It grows and it goes through this big growth phase, but then it plateaus. It levels off. So to me, a really interesting question that economists are far too scared to ask. Where are we on this curve? What happens if we're actually here? What happens if actually we're at the point where things are getting ready to plateau? If we're an economy that might come to stop growing, and yet it's geared to expect, demand, and depend upon unending growth, then you've really got a problem. That's when you have governments that say we have to have trade liberalizations and cut back some of this so-called red tape. actually that red tape that opens up trade and increases exports and promotes growth, in other words, that red tape was once called workers' rights or environmental protection or health and safety standards. So for me, a fundamental question or fundamental challenge is this. We have an economy now that needs to grow, whether or not that makes us thrive, because of the way it's structured. But what we need is an economy that makes us thrive, whether or not it's growing. And I'm so excited to be here tonight, but also in the future opportunities of working with verbal artists and visual artists. How can we draw and speak and poet and rhyme this new vision of a paradigm that we need to create?
We're really happy to be joined by Nick today. Nick is a writer, a journalist and storyteller who writes about just the impact that climate change has on our cultures and our beliefs. So.
I was asked to write this for a Tipping Point commission last year. The story is called Green Bang, and I wanted to explore this narrative of growth, of the idea of natural capital, and for people that aren't familiar with that term, basically every part of the natural world is seen in terms of its economic usefulness to humans, or specifically the human economy. So it's set a very short time in the future, when the narrative of natural capital has become the world's dominant story. The main character is an ex-ecosystem services trader, and he's trying very unsuccessfully to rekindle a relationship with his 9-year-old daughter. Sasha, yes, her solemnity grew, as if she sensed they were nearing that time, one of those adult conversations she'd probably learned to dread already. A siren whooped once far away. She sat there very still. There was a time before you were born when a tree was just a tree. That's all it was, just that. And it was the same for other things. A mountain, a waterfall, and a blade of grass were once just a mountain, a waterfall, and a blade of grass. A bee was once just a bee. There was no reason for them. She gazed at him with worried eyes. He knotted his hands on the picnic table and concentrated on the words, on simplifying the complexity. And even longer before you were born, before there were any bees or dinosaurs or single-celled organisms or anything else you might have heard about, the world itself, the planet we live on, that had no reason either. It was only a ball of minerals waiting for something to happen to it, for something to give it meaning. Then people came along, and for a long time they had no meaning either. They just happened to exist like all the other things. But eventually people learned how to value each other. And then they learned how to value the world around them. The trees, the waterfalls, the bees, the very planet they lived on. Everything was given a purpose that it didn't have before. Now, nothing exists for no reason. Everything is working together. It's a functioning part of a system that makes people happier. Of course, things go up and down. That's part of the natural cycle. You'll understand that someday. But the world has gained a kind of reason, just like people once did. Sasha, do you know what value is? It wasn't a question, and she didn't answer. It's another word for meaning. The higher the value, the higher the meaning. The meaning of the world is the value of the world, all its units added up, its leaves, its blades of grass, its reserves and its carbon sinks, its networks, systems, processes, everything together. Anders took a steadying breath. His hands felt rather far away, and something was happening to his eyes, a familiar throbbing. Sasha hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. Wind energy was stirring the trees, rustling the natural capital. Everything would be all right. Sasha, value is the same as love. How can we love what has no value? That is to say, what I mean, the phenomenon was occurring again. Water was coming from his eyes, turning the world into rainbow prisms, yet once again he did not feel sad. Instead, he felt quite elated. He wiped and snorted and managed to say, "I value you very much," before covering up his face and breathing wetly into his hands. He stayed that way for a while.
So now we turn to Stuart, another speaker we're really excited to have here tonight. Stuart has been with the New Economics Foundation for a very long time and has worked in the World Bank and Rio Tinto and has just a wealth of experience.
We've got an economy, I think people have described it very well already, but I call it the 4 U's. It's fine, apart from it's unsustainable, it's unfair, it's unstable, and it's making far too many people unhappy. We need a major system shift, but the big burning question is, how do these shifts happen? First, a compelling news story. It has to be a positive story, not just what's wrong with the old story. Secondly, that there's a vanguard or a movement of people across all sorts of different sectors who know things are wrong and prepared to work together. And thirdly, a values shift. There are very clearly some common values that we need to be striving for again. And they're very simply human dignity, and that's both rights and responsibilities. The idea that all our institutions should be working for the common good, and stewardship. Now, those sound all very fluffy and simple and obvious. But if you just designed an economic system around those, you would have to do something very different. You'd have to meet the basic needs, and those aren't just economic, they're psychological, security-wise, of every single human being on the planet. That human dignity demands that. Now, those values are very simple to say, but they require a major system shift in every way. A lot of people actually, even people you think who are very powerful, actually feel trapped by the system they're in. And that's why we need the type of people you got here. We need people across all sorts of walks of life helping imagine a new story. So my fundamental thing is we need a values revolution, we need a new story, and we've got to work together. And there's lots of things that will change. We need probably a basic income for every human being. We need to rethink the global commons. We need to rethink work. We've focused, so much on labor productivity. We don't want the Chicago Symphony Orchestra to be more productive. I don't want who cares for me in my old age to be more productive. I want more, So we've got to rethink the whole picture. I mean, it's as big as that. It's as exciting as that, but it's scary stuff. But can we do it? Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So our last but not least, we're going to hear from Johanna Nyman. We're really glad to have Johanna here as a really amazing young voice, and that she's the president of the European Youth Forum and currently works at the Environmental Justice Foundation here in London.
So I'm going to take over
where
you left it. We need to rethink this whole system, and we have to look ourselves in the mirror. And what we see right now in Europe, but also across the Atlantic, it's fear. And I think this fear, it comes from the unsustainable development that our societies have been going through. It gives the space to fear, and who follows in the steps of fear, I think we have seen them in a lot of countries across Europe, but also in the US at this moment. And it's not the future I want to see. And I think many of you agree with me on that. I think the first step, what we have to do in order to combat fear, is come up with this narrative, this positive story of saying, where do we want to go? And when it comes to young people and our possibilities, you already mentioned it. You saw probably in The Guardian, Generation Y and our prospects. In Europe right now, we have 23% of young people being unemployed with no prospects, no future. So this is the reality, and then we have to ask ourselves, how does this relate to growth? Well, many times when we talk about youth unemployment, for example, the promises we get is growth, and this will create jobs. And this is the way also our generation will be a part of the well-being we have had in Europe this far. For young people, we also have at the moment a lot of migrants coming to Europe, refugees knocking on the door to Europe, and they are not let in because there is a fear that we have too little to share, which is not the reality. We have a lot to share, but there needs to be a genuine will to redistribute between generations and between groups in society. And this will is lacking at the moment, and I think a narrative should be built also around this, about the values of sharing and caring about each other. So the question is, how can our generation get access to the welfare without growth? The question is also about Europe, because here right now it's a very heated debate. It's interesting to follow it also as a European. I cannot vote in the upcoming referendum, but of course eagerly following the discussion. And I think Europe is very important, not because of the pensions or because of the visas or because of the economic growth, but Europe is important because we share values. And Europe is a way of cooperating across borders, because I don't think we solve the question of economic growth or sustainability by sitting in a village somewhere and making a collective decision. We have to reach out and we have to make a decision amongst as many people as possible, because that is how we can truly change the reality we live in. So it's identifying our values and making sure that as many people as possible share those and work for those collectively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As this is the free word, this is the place to bring literary voices into political conversation, and so it's only appropriate that we'll end on another poem. We're really happy to be joined by Antosh today, who is a resident artist at the Roundhouse and part of several poetry collectives as well.
So coming to this, writing a poem for this was a real big question in terms of what I thought of growth. There's a kind of economy in death that I wanted to explore, which is, I know, quite a big term, but with growth it means expansion, and that means kind of erasing cultures that we then lose a heritage tied to. So that is a preamble to this poem. It is entitled, "Is that rope you're pulling on, or your lover, or the border of that forgotten place? We should have put the flat cap on the coffin," my brother says, "while we wait for the Irish priest to pronounce the holy demolition. And we time our unsinging, and I see Dad's dad run with Dad and my brother through a field, and I'm not there. I'm operating the camera on this occasion and holding the hand of the woman I love. She calls me Rope. Dad's laugh is trapped in his daughters. They call his heart saint for the patience. His wife brings up her war, how her country is forgot now that we drop unnamed gunpowder urns on a country whose people are trying to escape. She calls these people immigrants, even though they are her in their war, just decades on, still playing wartime, impersonating aeroplanes falling into the snow to eat it. The man she loved, she called Rope. His knotted brain dislocated from all places, his language. I asked if he wanted to see Poland again, to see home, and by home he just meant his family running through a field. Dad buried a language inside me. I cannot escape to anywhere but here. In the event I am dropped from a plane with the woman I love who calls me Rope, she could be mistaken as gunpowder and me the carrier. Mum hands me Dad's dad in a jar in a carrier bag. His powder existence is about as heavy as my bicycle. We don't know how to get him into his home country. They might suspect us carrying someone mistaken as gunpowder onto a plane, Mum says. We could store the ash in hollow appendages or drop him from a plane in his own named gunpowder urn. It would crash through an abandoned roof of a country we emptied, the gone people mistaken as gunpowder as they escaped to a country they were promised refuge. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Just another round of applause for all of our speakers.